The following episode of K-Ghoul Scooby Reviews was recorded in April, so certain life updates and pop cultural references may now be a few months out of date. Your humble hosts kindly ask you to be nice, keep this in mind, and most importantly, enjoy the episode.
Zoinks, jinkies, and jeepers to all of you meddling kids out there.
I'm Ross.
And I'm Alice.
And this is the K-Ghoul Scooby Reviews podcast.
So, how you been, Ross?
I could ask you the same thing.
Yeah, we have officially moved to a whole new location.
Yeah, moved in together properly after Alice sort of being an unofficial tag on to me and my flatmates for a while.
So it's now just officially just us in a one-bedroom little flat that's in East London. It's shaping up to be really nice so far.
Yeah, so if there's a difference in kind of acoustics and the general sound of the podcast, it's because we're in a different location and our current recording booth, which is just my workstation corner, is a little more echoey than our last one. If we end up in a position where we're getting any kind of funding for the podcast, maybe we'll look at soundproofing, but in the meantime, you guys may just have to deal with some echo.
Yeah, but of course, because we're so Scooby obsessive, we've still been thinking of ideas for new episodes. So
naturally,
yeah.
Well, we were already thinking of those beforehand.
That's true. We got a whole lineup,
but we had, our focus needed to be on utilities and boxes and all that fun stuff for a while instead. Unfortunately, because adulting is the worst.
Fun.
Yeah.
But last week last episode was obviously a very creative and fun one, getting all into our ideas for new reboots, live action reboots, which was silly. I mean, I think since we shared our ideas with each other, the main thing that's stuck in my mind from Ross is Matthew Lillard and Will Poulter as a pantomime horse monster.
All I have to do now is just say pantomime horse and Alice starts cracking up.
But, just so I'm not left out, what's the main thing you've taken away from my pitch? Lin-Manuel
Miranda as a big bad. Wouldn't have expected that, but I'd kind of love to see it in something. I don't particularly care what. Get him in the Batman sequel. Whatever. I don't care.
Yeah. Oh God, maybe he could play Two-Face. No one would see that coming.
My pick is still John David Washington, but I'll put Lin-Manuel Miranda as a worthy second place.
Yeah, that's probably a better pick, but that would be kind of a funny one. And I suppose just for now that we've gotten out of the way everything from the last episode, just to prepare for this new episode, we've got the general disclaimer for sort of content
warning, etc.
Can't guarantee we won't swear or make drug references or
take away the family-friendly nature of this family-friendly franchise.
Yeah,
we're the worst.
Or as last episode when I randomly brought up John Wayne Gacy.
That was second to last episode, as I recall. That was the villains one, correct?
Yeah, you're right. Well,
still though.
Yeah, can't promise I won't do that again. I don't know why I did the first time.
Scooby-Doo and serial killers match made in heaven?
There has to be at least one robot chicken skid that's done that.
Well, there's the famous one where Jason kills them all and then, I think, has sex with Velma.
Yep, there is, but, okay, if Seth Green and his collaborators haven't gone on that yet, they will at some point.
Wouldn't surprise me.
But yeah, and also for this one, we're going a lot more into spoiler territory.
Intense spoilers, primarily for some specific properties, mainly Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, which is the 2-season show that ran from, I believe, 2010 to 2013.
It did, yes.
Also, the recent animated movie canon, the series Scooby-Doo and the 13 Ghosts. That's it, right?
Potentially one other, but we won't have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Indeed. So, and this episode is going to be a little different because we have a guest with us.
Our first podcast guest only took 4 episodes and basically no social media traction, so just a matter of me knowing a lot of people who are way too into Scooby-Doo. I should say me. We both probably know too many people who are into Scooby-Doo.
Probably.
Yeah, my former flatmates, to name a couple, but maybe they'll be on the podcast at some point too. But in the meantime, we have my good friend Felix, who met through uni friend who I've retained said friendship with post uni. I've actually done some podcasting with him before. We were both on Film Focus, where we talked about Zack Snyder's Justice League at length with a couple of other fellows. But yeah, thank you for being here, Felix.
Hi guys, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's a true pleasure. I'm stoked. I'm absolutely buzzed to discuss some Scooby.
I can't tell if that was sincere or not.
Oh, you can see his big grin. The viewers can't see it at home, but I got a big old cheesy grin on.
The shit-eating grin. I don't know.
Well, my first
could go either way.
My first frame of reference for Felix was when you were doing like a month's worth or 100 days worth of Scooby cosplays.
Yeah, that was Felix's lockdown project. Simpler times, sort of?
Oh, better days.
Yeah.
Wait, no.
Yeah, now we just live in a timeline where there's still a pandemic, but everyone pretends there isn't. Anyway, on to happier thoughts.
Back to Scoob.
Yeah.
Well, not the Scoob movie, because meh, but Scooby.
Meh is generous, to be honest.
Yes, that is generous. I don't know why I said meh.
What were your thoughts on Scoob, Felix?
I think that sound effect, meh, is a great summary of that movie.
It was a film that existed, and it wasn't very good.
Basically. Well, let's hope we'll talk about at least something that's better than Scoob with this episode. But
well, we already know one Scooby property that all three of us are big fans of. Mm-hmm. But we are covering a few other bases as well.
Yes. So this episode, we're basically going to talk the topic of serializing Scooby-Doo, how you adapt the general premise into a serialized format, and the various attempts it has been done, and the pros and cons and successes and less successes.
Indeed. So, yeah. I mean, I think it's safe to say that as a franchise, Scooby-Doo is kind of built on the Monster of the Week format, in the same vein as you could argue something like Doctor Who or what's another example?
X-Files.
X-Files, Buffy, yeah, all of those. So it's sort of built on a very similar format. So in a sense, the whole idea of serializing an IP like Scooby-Doo is a little weird. With that said, there are one in particular, that have done it very well.
Yeah, I mean, shall we get into the properties that have tried, or?
Yeah, I mean, unless you have anything to add to that train of thought, Felix, before we get into specifics.
No, other than I agree. It's an interesting decision to try to take something that is very, very, very Monster of the Week and try to sort of tie it into something a little bit more serialized.
Okay.
I wonder if it works. Ooh.
Well, we can start by looking at the very first attempt to make something serialized-ish, which would be the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo from the 80s.
Yeah, I forget the exact dates it ran from until. It was a 13 episode series, or I think it was technically 12 because they never actually got to make their final episode, which is why they later did the Curse of the 13th Ghost movie, which we'll get into later.
But I guess it was sort of the first attempt in that it was a self-contained story that was looking at a particular arc or idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was still very episodic in as much as like each episode had a distinctive thing, but there was the underlying plot threat of they got to get all these demons back in the chest.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like a lot of serialized content, cartoons, I guess, kind of prior to 2007, which I'll talk about later. But it's sort of like there is a continuity, but if you do just drop in at random, you can watch and it's not that jarring.
More or less, yeah. I mean, I think we have very mixed feelings on 13 Ghosts. I think you're the same, Felix, correct?
Yeah. The highs are highs, but the lows, the lows are low.
The lows are fucking flim-flam.
Hashtag cancel flim-flam. I want him gone.
Yeah, ban him from the academy for a decade.
Oh, God.
We keep it topical here.
Yeah, topical. It won't date in like 5 weeks.
How many people on this planet do you think like still remember Flim Flam? Like what percent of the population do you reckon have like any concept of Flim Flam?
I don't know. Thing is, like,
It's got to be pretty small, right?
I mean, people remember Scrappy.
Yeah.
Hate him, but people at least remember him.
Yeah, he's like a memorable hate. Flim Flam, you just hate.
I mean, we've gone on record before and saying like Scrappy's fine. like as a character, he's not the worst thing. It's just he's so reviled because the writing in the show just got progressively shitter after he was introduced. But it's like, just the idea of giving Scooby like a precocious, scrappy.
Literally.
Shit. Oh my god, I didn't even plan
That's
that.
why they named him Scrappy. Oh my god.
There we go.
Oh
my.
shit.
Revelations on this podcast today. My goodness.
That's good stuff. That is quality.
Oh, I legitimately did not plan that. But yeah, a precocious, antagonistic little puppy nephew. Not the worst idea. Like, honestly, like, a lot of cartoons around the time were doing a similar thing.
That's true, yeah.
But yeah, why did people think Flim Flam was a good idea? And like, again, it's like, I wish I didn't remember Flim Flam because he's the worst.
Well, I guess the Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated team remembered him because of that, 1 second joke in.
Yeah, I mean, they draw more attention to the Scrappy hate, but I do love the throwaway line about like 25 to life. It's a long stretch even for a preteen con man. It's just like, good, lock him away.
Well, I guess just in terms of how 13 Ghosts serialized it, obviously it's this specific, set piece or what's the word, catalyst, where box of demons is opened, all these demons are out in the open, and the gang made up of Daphne, Shaggy, Scooby, Scrappy, and Flim Flam along for the ride, plus Vincent Van Ghoul.
Yeah. Who is it? Vincent Van Ghoul is a treasure, and he did not deserve to be associated with Flim Flam.
He did not, but they have to travel around and put the demons back in the box.
Yeah.
Or back in the chest.
Indeed. Which, I mean, you pointed this out to me earlier today, actually, pre-recording this, that like as much as it is kind of still somewhat episodic, there's not a lot about it that aligns with the traditional Scooby formula. Like, there's no real mystery. There's no sketchy capitalists in masks and whatever. It's just kind of goofy, spooky shit happening. And to be fair, like, I think a lot of Scooby properties in the 80s were doing similar things. Like, there's the 80s movie trilogy, I think TV movie technically, but it's like, you had Reluctant Werewolf, the Boo Brothers, and the Ghoul School, none of which had anything resembling a mystery.
No, Boo Brothers was probably the closest, just because there was a treasure hunt.
Yeah. I think, isn't that another one of the instances where it's sort of alluded to that Shaggy's family were like Confederate soldiers or something?
Oh no.
Oh dear. I don't blame Shaggy for the sins of his past, but zoinks indeed. But yeah, cancel Uncle Shagworthy, I guess.
By the end, I want several Scooby-Doo characters to be cancelled. That's my goal here.
So Flim Flam. Is Uncle Shagworthy the Confederate one?
No, he seems more like, aristocrat, which maybe that's cancel-worthy in its own way, but...
Well, true.
I think the name alone is pretty bad. I want him gone.
Well, Uncle Shagworthy, yes.
He sounds like an Austin Powers character, and that overlaps.
Or is it Lord Shagworthy?
Oh,
Put it this way, if he's an aristocrat, he's definitely the kind of aristocrat who hosted orgies. Zoinks, anyway. Oh, God.
Good thing we gave that disclaimer.
Yeah. It took getting Felix onto the podcast to get a little more filth in here. Go figure. Thanks, buddy.
I try my best.
So, yeah, as far as the 80s as a Scooby-Doo era goes, to a great extent, it had already kind of abandoned the classic Scooby formula.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, trying to serialize it and doing something a little bit different is not that out of left field for the time. I would argue.
And I suppose maybe in a way it was an environment where making something serialized was a little easier, just because you weren't as reliant on the monster of the week in the same way.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting as well to have a show like this where built into the title and the premise of the show is its own limitation. It's like 13 ghosts. There are 13 stories and then we're done. Like,
and then there were only 12.
And then there were only 12. Like, it's a very bizarre. I could think of like no other series that maybe like 13 Reasons Why. That's a weird comparison. But like other shows.
No.
Yeah. But like I can't think of any other show that's like, oh, here we are. There are only going to be these. Like, it's an interesting. There's got
to be some, but my mind's drawing blank.
But like, were they at the time? Does that suggest a sort of they knew maybe this is a slightly riskier? Does this work as well?
Maybe that's why they kept it to more of a concise number.
Something that like we're even almost ruling out the idea of like a season 2 here. We're very much like, this is more of like a fun little event. We see if it works. We play the field. If it doesn't work, fine. If it does, cool. But it's just such a weird little 13 ghosts so explicitly be like, 13 stories. We'll only tell 12, but we're tightening it up.
No, I suppose that does lead nicely on to the conclusion, the sort of, I guess you could say, the Serenity-esque conclusion to the 13 Ghosts saga.
Which we'll talk on. We won't go into complete detail because it also ties into a different canon. But the concluding movie, Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost.
Yeah, so that's part of, I think, it is a trilogy, right? A more recent animated trilogy, which I think started with...
It started with that movie.
It started with that, then it was Return to Zombie Island, and then concluded with Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. Talk more about those ones in a minute, because we got... Yeah, but...
We got a couple more bases to cover first.
Yes, I mean... Yeah, it was a weird conclusion, because that canon of Scooby properties, Warner Brothers, is like, no supernatural whatsoever.
Yeah, whereas the 80s were all about just like, we don't care, all the weird supernatural stuff you can think of is in here. Yeah. Like Shaggy's just going to turn into a werewolf and have a Mad Max Fury Road style chase with Dracula in this one for some reason.
I mean, I think the concluding movie...
Reluctant Werewolf's great, I'll say it. It's ridiculous, but I love it.
Yeah, I think the concluding movie, it's kind of, as a movie, it's pretty good, and I think it's mostly...
It's not bad.
Yeah, it's decent.
3 out of 5.
Has a very good opening, I will say that. That is creepy. But it's sort of a movie that I would imagine if you are really invested in the 13 Ghosts series, it would probably piss you off a lot.
Oh, for sure. Because it tries to have it both ways with the ending of like, ooh, we're sticking to the skeptical nature of this, but also, ooh, maybe there's some supernatural stuff. We're just going to have Velma act completely out of character and not open the box. Yeah. It's like, which, that also ties into the fact that they've, in recent years, lent really, really hard into Velma being the skeptic, which, like, other iterations have done that too, and that's been fine. But in this more recent canon, it's like, okay, guys, just chill with it a little bit.
Oh dear. Yeah. Well, I would say before we go completely into those movies, the next thing, which we'll only talk about briefly, would be the show that started in 2006, I believe, Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue.
Have you watched Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, Felix?
I've seen a few episodes when it was broadcasting at the time, and I was but a young lad.
Oh. Okay, so did young lad Felix enjoy Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue?
No, young lad Felix was deeply confused by what he was watching.
Fair enough.
We
tried to, what did we get, like, through like the first 3 episodes or something?
I think at most we watched 4, but it could have just been 3.
It all kind of blurred together, to be honest. It's one of those kids' properties that's just endless movement and noise to me. And this is something, I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but this is something that I do respect a little more about, shall we say, better Scooby properties and animated properties and children's media in general. Like, I think kids are a lot smarter than they're given credit for by these showrunners and filmmakers a lot of the time, because they can handle like moments of quiet and suspense.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I think the movie Camp Scare is like surprisingly good and doesn't get enough love, because I think you've seen Scooby-Doo and Camp Scare. Yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah, no, I really like it. I think part of what I like about it is that there are moments of quiet, like there's the sequence where I think they're snorkeling underwater, and they have a run in with the fish man. That whole sequence, sort of probably like pushing 5 minutes of like no dialogue at all, and it's just visual storytelling and suspense. And it's just like, yeah, kids can handle that. If you pull it off, and it's engaging and exciting, it'll work. But like Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, to me, again, from what we saw, we couldn't stomach watching the whole thing.
That's understandable.
But from what we saw, it's basically the animated TV equivalent of just like jangling your keys in front of a child's face and being like, look, movement and noise.
Well, in terms of, I guess, the plot for what there is, essentially, it leans kind of hard into more mad science stuff. And not in a spooky way. Essentially, Shaggy's uncle, who's a prize scientist, has gone missing, so him and Scooby are trying to find him.
Is he a Confederate scientist?
It's kind of possible. So yeah, Scooby and Shaggy are trying to find him, going on these random adventures while a submarine of mad German scientists are trying to also chase them and find the uncle's secret weapon or something. I don't know, the stuff with the villains was especially annoying.
I zoned out of a lot of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but one thing I think is kind of interesting if you look at both 13 Ghosts and Get a Clue, as I'm counting them as both kind of pre-2007. Both of them, to kind of serialize it, they kind of chuck away large parts of the Scooby formula. They chuck away the mysteries,
the crooks and masks.
The crooks and masks. Yeah. And in both cases, they kind of chuck away some of the core of the group, because
that's
13 Ghosts, no Fred or Velma, and then Get a Clue. Technically, Fred, Daphne, and Velma in it, but I think they more make guest appearance. They're not.
They're window dressing all.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting in a way that these kind of versions thought to serialize it, you needed to get rid of certain things to make it compatible.
Yeah, the idea essentially being like, we can't serialize it and also have the classic gang, which you can. We'll get to that. But
I guess we'll get to it pretty quickly, because we're going to jump forward in time by a lot to the sort of most recent video-on-demand movie canon, which, as we've said, is Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost, Scooby-Doo Return to Zombie Island, and Happy Halloween, Scooby-Doo.
Happy Halloween, Scooby-Doo is one of the most insane movies I've ever seen, and I love every part of it, but my God, it's like a mini Space Jam, that movie. It's so insane.
It kind of is. Yeah.
It's the weirdest.
It's like Elvira's in this, and
also Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yeah, and also Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow, is in this, but we're not going to cross over with Batman in any other way.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so insane.
It's ridiculous, but I kind of...
Yeah. Also,
we might need to revisit that.
From what I remember, it was kind of gory in a way. There was a lot of violent pumpkin death.
Yeah. I mean, you get away with the gore because it's all like green goop and vegetable innards, but still...
It's still like it's more than you're expecting from that show. You're like, oh my God.
These pumpkins are at this point sentient beings for all intents and purposes, or in theory, but
yeah. So the kind of canon for these three, or the thing that makes it serialized, it's sort of a loose.
It's pretty much just one character, right?
Yeah. So there's a sheriff who he makes his appearance in the first one, The Curse of the 13th Ghost. He's a sheriff who's initially sympathetic to the gang, but is also like, you're almost adults, because after 50 years they're almost adults.
Yeah.
But there is a level of, if they keep up these antics, they could actually get in serious trouble at some point, and he might not be able to cover for them. So it's kind of a thing of he's trying to sort of push them to not, be solving mysteries, and then there's more of that in Return to Zombie Island from what I looked up because I can't remember. But
for the record, we've seen Return to Zombie Island once. We hated it and got quite drunk to get through it.
Good times.
That's understandable. That's absolutely understandable.
Didn't we watch it back to back with? Or, no, I don't know if we watched it back to back, but we watched it around the same time we watched Daphne and Velma.
We were gonna do it back to back, but we were so annoyed and instead rewatched, the original Zombie Island.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
But I think in Return to Zombie Island, he makes another appearance where he's a bit more antagonistic to the group, and then finally in Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo, it turns out he was actually a previous villain they unmasked, and he had been posing
Agatha.
posing as a sheriff to just derail the group from the inside. Which is, again, it's a bit more of a loose continuity. You can just watch any of these movies.
Yeah, I mean, we watched them out of order, to be fair.
Yeah.
So.
And, it's fine, but yeah, that is, so it's mainly that kind of serializes that, plus, I guess, maybe certain just character beats, like Velma being a major skeptic, Daphne being a little more proactive.
Yeah. Shaggy and Scooby are largely unchanged, from what I remember.
As is often the case. Fred has existential crises a few times, I think.
Good stuff.
And then turns into Arnold from Predator in the climax of Happy Halloween.
God, it's so insane.
It's the most glorious thing.
Please, if you haven't seen this movie, go watch Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo. You will not regret it. However weird you think it is, it's weirder. It's so much weirder.
And, well, there's like a big Scooby-Doo elephant in the room that we want to talk about. But first, I think we have like a little tangent just to sort of serialized animated series that kind of happened prior to, say, 2005. So you have a point you want to start off with.
Yeah, because sort of serialized storytelling in kind of animation in general and children's media or family-friendly animation in particular, it's like it didn't happen loads for a while. I mean, the closest you got, I would argue, was something like the DCAU or DC Animated Universe, which early on in kind of that canon or continuity, you had Batman the Animated Series, which for all intents and purposes was just a very episodic show, but there were certain things that you kind of, you needed to watch earlier episodes to make sense of later ones, with like, Harvey Dent appearing as Harvey Dent for about 2 or 3 episodes before they had the big Two-Face transformation. Dick Grayson changing from Robin to Nightwing from between the original run and the New Batman Adventures revival. And yeah, so there were little bits like that. And then by the time you got to stuff like Batman Beyond and Justice League, it was, you would have kind of the episodic individual stories, but kind of underlying season running plot threads. Like in season 1 of Batman Beyond, it's Derek Powers transforming into Blight and becoming, for all intents and purposes, Terry McGinnis's arch nemesis. And so, yeah, that sort of, I would argue, kind of paved the way for other animated shows and children's media to actually, tackle more serialized storytelling that way.
Yeah.
I mean, Felix, you're a big DC guy as well. I mean, anything to add to that, or any other properties or IPs you'd shout out in that sense?
I mean, others that are sort of stick out to me as being not early, but I think just probably pre-2005, probably maybe only just. I think of a show I used to love when I was a kid, a little bit of Ben 10.
Sure.
Which obviously started off incredibly Monster of the Week, but as it became more popular, what was really interesting to see as a viewer, and actually sort of go back and look at, is you can see as it goes on, there is more of a confidence that grows, and they go, okay, no, people are watching this, so we can start to now say, actually, let's do things that is going to make a little less sense if you haven't seen these couple episodes.
So after a point, they trusted that the show had a loyal following who would be beating up with it.
It's exactly that, which is always something I really enjoyed seeing in a lot of shows that sort of start to do well. I think even in the ones we've mentioned earlier, the ones that are very Monster of the Week, your Doctor Who's and X-Files. It's always fun because I even think in these shows you can always see when they're at their height, there's often a moment where they start to get a little more serialized because they go, okay,
and even
we trust.
technically, like with Doctor Who, if you look at kind of the classic Who era,
Yeah.
that those would have been. I mean, when you buy those or when you get those on home media now, it kind of comes as the whole story, but they would have aired in 20-ish minute segments, sort of from week to week of the day. So it would be the one story, but it would take place over 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to see. Yeah, 'cause I think the DC animated shows, but then they're all sort of interesting examples of, I don't know what the word for it is, but that shows that sit right in the middle between like Monster of the Week and Serialized, where they just get to a point where they're still just disconnected enough that you could watch them in any order, but ideally you're watching them in the right order and you will get more
like
from
if you're
it.
a loyal follower of the show, you'll be rewarded with a more well-rounded story ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a couple sort of TV shows from pre kind of 2005 that did have elements of, well, that really were leaning more heavily into serialized format and where, watching a continuous plot was more important. One that I ended up revisiting because I remembered it existed, thanks to a YouTube video, would be a series from the 2000 called Witch, which was a magical girls show about girls who could transform into guardians of
the kind of elemental guardians. They had like the water, earth, fire thing going on.
Yeah, which
I remember Witch. I have some fond memories of it.
Rewatching, I'm like, dear God, this slaps. But that was it was actually owned by Disney.
How strange.
It didn't,
as opposed to now when everything's owned by Disney.
But it didn't last very long. It was based on a series of comic books. Comic books lasted the series by quite a few years. It only lasted 2 seasons, so why it didn't last, who knows? I would imagine it just wasn't making enough money. So that's an unsuccessful one in the sense of money and longevity. I can also think of a couple other ones, like say Winx Club, which is another rabbit hole I've gone down. But
I have no frame of reference for Winx Club. I don't know about you, Felix.
It rings the tiniest bell in the back of my head and nothing more.
So this is all on you, huh?
Okay, well, it was another show about fairies, but it had quite chunky season-long plots involving a big bad they had to face, different obstacles they would need to tackle per week. You may have a character transformed into a fish monster, and that's not going to be resolved till a couple episodes later, or someone's got a magic spell that's made them turn against the main group.
Right.
So it was a lot more serialized, but the key thing about that was it was from an Italian production company. And let's be honest, there's probably many anime from Japan out there, like Sailor Moon or other stuff that was always serialized, and any anime fan listening would probably laugh at us by saying, there was no serialized kids cartoons for
yeah, we're primarily talking about Western animation, like anime, a lot of great stuff, but that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah. But I would say pre-2005, it seemed like stuff that did lean very hard into a serialized format either wasn't that successful or it wasn't from like the US.
Basically.
Why have I been saying 2005 as a big year? Because that was the year that Avatar: The Last Airbender aired. Which, I mean, have you seen it, Felix?
I have not.
What?
Wow. Well, you had.
To be fair, I hadn't until quite recently.
Actually, to be fair, so did I. But
I don't know. You struck me as someone who would have seen Avatar somehow.
I don't know. I mean, maybe you guys are the perfect people to ask about this, because I worry that I would watch something like that now and go, it's not great. I probably had to see it as a kid to love it. But as people who just watched it recently,
top tier animation, honestly. Top tier Western animation.
Dear God. Animation's beautiful. Some of the best world building of anything, of any media.
Arguably, yes.
Yep. And great characters. But obviously, it's a show that became very popular, and because it was so successful and it was very serialized, especially from book 2, so season 2 onwards, that kind of, in a way, sort of set a stage for TV shows that were owned by major animation networks that could show how successful, how much money they could make, how much longevity, and how much of a big fan base you could make. So really, in a way, Avatar set the stage for other things like Adventure Time and more recent shows like The Owl House.
Gravity Falls, you could argue as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I think, in a way, Avatar is sort of the turning point that led us to stuff like the final thing we've really wanted to talk about.
We've been building up to this.
Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, the best use of serializing the Scooby format.
Yeah, this is what this episode's been building up to, really. Like, just an excuse to talk about Mystery Inc. in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Where does one start with our love for this show?
Oh, God.
I think straight away, to sort of jump off what you were saying, Alice, earlier, I think what's really cool about this show, especially compared to the other two, is that the other two shows very much feel like just separate shows in which the Scooby-Doo IP has sort of been squished in. Like, Shaggy Scooby Get a Clue could be about anyone. It's like someone was just like, it won't sell if it's just two randomers. I don't know, maybe it's those two kids from Scooby-Doo. Whereas this...
It could be about any hyperactive kid.
It could be anything. And even 13 goes to a degree, you're like, that... You could swap them out for other characters, and it would be like, yeah, this is...
A few tweaks, sure.
Yeah, it's still... It's just a kid's show. It's fine. Whereas what's really cool about this is that this is, at its very core, still absolutely Scooby-Doo. Even though it is serialized, it is very clearly and very much a Scooby-Doo show.
Yeah, but it goes above and beyond that and kind of gives the Scooby franchise a wider lore connected to the Anunnaki, which are an actual kind of mythological field of study you can look into if you want to, which is kind of crazy and great. It's interesting, like we've tried to kind of convince a couple people in the past to watch Mystery Incorporated, kind of our main selling point being like it gives Scooby-Doo like this extra lore and it's really kind of cool and in-depth. A couple of people have been like, no, I don't like that with Scooby. Like they just kind of want the classic, you know, they want the Monster of the Week format. They just want to drop in, have some light-hearted mystery solving fun and be done with it, which I guess I can understand on some level, because if that is sort of Scooby-Doo, I think it's fair to say is kind of, they're very much kind of a comfort media for a lot of us, and the idea of taking away those comforting episodic elements to it is, you know, could be a bit off-putting to the uninitiated.
Yeah.
With that said, I think, well, you're absolutely right, Felix. It is indisputably, like, to its core, a Scooby-Doo property, and like the way it kind of blends, you know, kind of those classic elements with the newer, more serialized stuff, but all kind of ties it together in a way that is indisputably Scooby-Doo. Is really, really, really smart. Like, we rewatched our mutual favorite episode, Nightmare in Red, yesterday, which is primarily takes place in like this kind of interdimensional dream world. So, you know, yes, like they do get intensely into supernatural stuff towards the end of, well, I guess I say towards the end, like it's always there in Mystery Incorporated.
Yeah.
They always knew what direction they were going, but even within those kind of kooky dream world supernatural trappings, when they capture the freak of Crystal Cove and reveal it to be the Spanish conquistador, it's like you still, within those trappings, get your classic Scooby-Doo unmasking.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff I really love, when it kind of, you know, it keeps what we know and love about the franchise, but, you know, it knows how to expand it into a wider, more epic story with dramatic and emotional weight.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a large part of why it works, just the blending of, you know, the classic formula with other inspirations and other elements to keep it fresh.
Yeah, and towards the latter half of season 2, because it only ran for 2 seasons, but it's sort of, I think it's fair to say, like, after a point, you're still getting the Monster of the Week elements. You're still getting, you know, your kooky villains and whatnot, but they sort of after a certain turning point in the story, almost feel like a secondary thing to the ongoing threat. Whereas it's very much, in many ways, you could think drop in season 1 for the bulk of it, again up to a certain point, and think this is just another Scooby show, a very well-made one, but it's following the formula pretty verbatim for the most part. Whereas, it's sort of by the end of the latter half of season 2, you're kind of like, those elements are still there, but it feels like they're just kind of they're just there, like the gang kind of have to deal with them, but they've got their mind on other things. So like the story kind of, by nature of that, builds up a lot more suspense and sort of feels like it's expanding to something bigger, which it is. Expanding into full-on cosmic horror by the end. But
definitely.
But yeah, it's interesting that, and again, I can see why that might put some people off, but I don't know. I think the way they kind of build up to that and bleed into the final threat is just so seamless, and obviously, they had it planned out from the beginning, which you can tell if you rewatch the show, which we have. Well, we're currently near the end of our current rewatch, which is maybe, is it like our second or third rewatch of the show?
This is the third rewatch.
Yeah. How many times have you watched it all the way through, Felix?
Probably is 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good stuff. But I think that's, again, sort of talking about why this works where others don't. I think what's really interesting about this series is it feels like one of the first times that they, as in our core cast, the gang, are characters, where they start to go beyond being just, the geeky one, the leader, Shaggy likes his food. It feels like this is the first series where you start to go, even within the first episode, we're going, oh, we're sort of touching on relationships. And while not all of it works, you're going, oh, they're making a conscious effort to go, what if these were slightly more 3-dimensional characters? What are their relationships? What happens when they get rocked?
And again, they do all that without taking away from the stuff we know and love. Like Shaggy and Scooby are still eating all manner of weird shit and giggling
cowards.
About it. Yeah. Fred's still, a complete gormless himbo who's somehow leading this group and loves his traps.
Yeah, Velma's, they've amped up the Darianist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she is very much the skeptic in this version, but not in the grating way of the more recent movie canon. It's more like, again, as you say, it kind of feeds into legitimate character beats and growth. Like when, in the episode Nightmare in Red, when she's sort of kind of can't fathom what's happening, that they're just fighting this crazy monster in a mystical dream world. It's kind of a worldview shattering moment for her, because she's I think she says herself, like she spent her life operating on logic and science and reason, and she just kind of breaks down and goes, I need this to make sense.
Yeah, it's a good moment.
Yeah. And Daphne sort of, I guess she's kind of the voice of reason to some extent.
Yeah, she's kind of, in a way, more of the glue that holds the group together than Scooby is. She's sort of the one who puts a lot of effort into dealing with everyone else's problems, but no one else is quite there for her, which, where by the end of the first season and with the first couple episodes of season 2, the fact that she's gone away from the group and isn't talking to them, it makes total sense. It's probably...
I'll blame her, to be honest.
Yeah, that's another interesting moment where you go, okay, it's fun to see the show try to find a position for her that makes a little more sense, where they sort of go, okay, well, what is Daphne to this group? And again, going, okay, well, maybe actually she's what's holding them together, and maybe actually in some ways she is too good for this group. And there is a sort of weird element of, all your family are off doing great things, and you could be too, but, you just love solving them mysteries.
Yeah, and she loves her dumb, beautiful himbo with the desperate Dan chin.
She loves vegetables.
Still one of the funniest lines in the show to me. it's in like one of the early episodes, when her parents are trying to set her up with this trust fund baby type guy, and her dad used this weird analogy of like, why have a hamburger when you could have delicious filet mignon or something?
Yeah.
And she goes, I don't even like meat. I like vegetables, like Fred. It's like, yeah, he's a bit of a vegetable, isn't he?
Absolutely iconic. Absolutely iconic.
So speaking of characters, as well as just, our core five, it also has, other recurring characters who are built into the lore and have, their own kind of story beats.
Yeah, and even, well, obviously, yeah, the big ones are like, the former Mystery Incorporated and Professor Pericles, ultimately our final big bad in a way. But yeah, you even get like little extra characters who are sort of red herrings initially, but then actually become, the unmasked crook in later episodes. Like there's one character, George Avocados/Avocados, who I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's in 2 episodes as the red herring before one episode in season 2 where he actually does turn out to be the guy behind it.
Yeah, and you also have like the soccer players, Ethan and Gary. Who are just, annoying and hate Fred.
But then they're behind, is it the
Grim
crazy
Judgment.
Pilgrim guy?
Yeah.
Jebediah Grimm, that's it. But yeah, so it's nice that you kind of have those little recurring elements. And again, it's sort of like you were saying earlier, Felix, with Ben 10. Like if you follow the show and you know these people, you'll be like, oh, hey, that's them from before. And you'll ultimately kind of be rewarded for being a long-running fan of the show by picking up on these things and getting a more fulfilling story out of it ultimately.
Yeah. I also just want to shout out Velma's mom as an underrated character.
She's great. She is
fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
What a prequel series about Mrs. Dinkley.
Yeah, just her exploits,
Yeah, just whatever crazy. Fuck it. Give us an X-Files-esque show about just this kooky, plus-size, promiscuous lady.
Where are you, Warner Bros? Are you listening to this? Get this man the money.
They're definitely not.
And I think another thing that does make this show kind of interesting is that, and maybe help to make it more serialized, is that there are clearly a lot of inspirations from other things. As you mentioned, the Anunnaki as
actual mythological stuff, which I think is primarily tied to ancient Egypt, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yeah. And there is other mythology it ties to, but also like other pieces of pop culture. Like you've mentioned Nightmare on Red. That episode is basically an entire Twin Peaks homage.
Yeah.
It's a very like detailed one. It even has the same. It even casts the little guy from Twin Peaks to voice a new character. And, which I love.
Plus, like as we pointed out before, it's safe to say the creative brains behind Mystery Incorporated, they love horror in general.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of homages in there, and a lot of just kind of good horror filmmaking technique, really. Just kind of done in a kids media palatable way, obviously, but it's like, there's moments where it's just like, this is kind of legitimately intense and suspenseful.
I mean, the episode, I don't remember what it's called, but when it essentially becomes a Saw-esque death trap where they go to this underground house.
Escape from Mystery Manor.
Yeah, which is, very much a clear, like, someone's been watching a couple of those movies and went, can I do this in my kids' thing? Maybe. Let's see.
Yeah, and then probably in my top 3 or 5 favorite episodes is the later, I think it's early season 2, one called Night Terrors, which is essentially an extended homage to The Shining.
Yes, yeah.
Right down to having the kind of Dick Halloran-esque character be the guy behind it.
Which is great, yeah.
So yeah, it's got influences, and it's got kind of kind of picking little bits, little nuggets and flavors of lots of different stuff, but weirdly it never feels derivative.
No, it's all kind of mixed in just the right way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the other really interesting things, and again, I think is this unique to this series? It might be unique to this series, but it's one of the only series that takes place ostensibly in one location, rather than having them travel around, to various random locations on the globe. So much of this is in Crystal Cove, just in
I think
one area.
Scooby-Doo was all in Coolsville.
I think some others are, but again, it's a little more unusual, especially coming right off the back of like What's New Scooby-Doo, which is just fucking the most insane globe-trotting. Like
Absolutely.
you name a country, they're there for some reason.
They're in Rome one week,
Yeah,
and I don't know, Egypt the next for no.
But it helps again to build this very fun world where you do start to recognize recurring characters, where you understand how things work.
And the fact that they created a new setting for it, they didn't just fall back on Coolsville again, which, nothing wrong with that. Coolsville is kind of, I think, I want to say everything from Puppet and Scooby-Doo onwards, like most properties since then have used Coolsville as the primary setting for all the Scooby-Doo stuff. But it's very evident that, Mystery Incorporated created Crystal Cove, an entirely new setting, and then built this whole insane lore kind of connected specifically to this town and this world. It's almost kind of Stephen King-esque, you think
it
about
really is.
some of the fictional towns that King created, like Derry being the main setting of it, which is, Maine is a real place, obviously, but like Derry, Maine, very much a fictional town, and King created that so that he could kind of create this whole sprawling lore of like, Derry's kind of been home to this ancient evil since the beginning of time, and the kind of the Anunnaki lore and Nibiru thing that Mystery Incorporated builds up around Crystal Cove feels quite similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. But I think, as a show, it does still care about the franchise or the IP as a whole. I mean, obviously we have the return of both the Hex Girls and Vincent Van Ghoul.
Yeah.
I mean, even though the Hex Girls have like the redesign, which apparently fans didn't like.
Yeah, which they then lampshade a little bit when they bring the Hex Girls back for another episode, and they're like, some fans prefer our classic costumes. Which, again, even that they kind of like throw under the bus a little bit, because they have their classic costumes for one scene, and then they're in these kind of kooky like De los Muertos designs for the finale, which is this crazy Scott Pilgrim-esque band situation. It's great.
That was so good. It's a fantastic episode.
And repeating like old villains, obviously, Charlie the Robot ties into a big plot beat.
Indeed, yeah.
The space coot gets kidnapped.
They sort of kind of fabricate a bit of stuff to do with the Creeper at one point as well, which is quite fun.
I was reading just earlier that, they talk about when they were starting out on this series, one of the very first things they did was go right back to, the first Bible for the first show and look at, all the extensive notes that have been made about these characters, about their parents, their friends and family and all that stuff. And it definitely comes through, because you're right, there's a lot of fun little nods and tips to older series, to other connections, things like that. It feels like it's been made by people who enjoy that, who enjoy the series. Yeah.
Like people who are invested in the Scooby franchise and, love it, but wanted to do something more epic and grandiose and heartfelt with it, which is wonderful.
Which definitely helps. I mean, I think, if the makers had come into this cynically, thinking Scooby was, I don't know, lame or something, it would have showed.
Yeah, because if they'd just approached it from sort of like how we were talking earlier about how 13 Ghosts and Shaggy and Scooby-Doo get a clue, like you could switch out a couple of elements and it could essentially just be any animated show. If the creators of Mystery Incorporated had approached it from a cynical standpoint, like you said, and kind of wanted to do the serialized cosmic horror epic story, but not given two shits about the Scooby IP, then it would have felt completely kind of out of left field and disconnected. And it's just like, why is this a Scooby-Doo property? But because it was made with so much care and attention, it shows. And one moment I love actually is I think it is in the very last episode, Come Undone, I think it's called, which is full-blown apocalyptic nightmare, to be honest. But like amidst all of this craziness, which at this point has just abandoned the classic Scooby formula completely, it's just a cosmic horror apocalypse.
Yeah.
But amidst all of that, there's one shot where the gang are running away from the evil entity, which has merged with Pericles into this big Cthulhu-esque monster, and like the shot kind of tracks them alongside, and it's a clear homage to like how they would run as a group in the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You? You even have Scooby's legs kind of spinning around like a wheel, like it used to. I'm just like, like little moments like that. It's just like, no, they knew what they were doing. They've loved this property for years. They just wanted to do something different with it.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do we want to just rapid fire off some of our favorite things about Mystery Incorporated? You can go first, Felix.
You know what I will say? Despite the fact it is only 2 seasons, I love that it does manage to wrap it all up in the end. It does have a very, very, very satisfying, which I think is rare often for shows like this that are trying to go quite big and then sort of get cancelled a little earlier than they would like and sort of have to go, oh shit, okay, we got to wrap some stuff up. I actually think they pull it off entirely, and by the end you come away quite satisfied. You sort of go, I'm sad there's not a season 3, but actually I don't really need there to be one. I don't need there to be one. This is fine.
Would have kind of ruined it.
Yeah.
But the very end sort of implies that the events of Mystery Incorporated are sort of a precursor to maybe not exactly the events of Scooby-Doo Where Are You, but a precursor to that those
sort of
which I think is really fun.
Yeah, I love how well, as on a depressing note, I love that Fred's best parental figure is Maya Jones' dad. It's so sad, but like, he's the only one who vaguely cared about Fred's well-being. I also do love that Gary Cole, the Office Space guy who voices Mayor Dad, he's actually like... he's actually like...
Go ahead and give me a great animated character to voice. That'd be great.
I like that he's actually 20 years younger than Frank Welker.
That is quite funny. On a similar train of thought, I love that they made Fred interesting. I don't think it's controversial to say that historically Fred has probably been the least interesting of the gang in most iterations.
I don't know. I feel like Daphne kind of gets labeled as the boring one, but I don't think that's really that fair.
No.
I would agree it's Fred.
Yeah, I mean, he is just kind of the
stock good-looking guy.
The stock good-looking confident leader in a lot of iterations, even in other iterations that we love, like Scooby-Doo Where Are You? The OG series. And it's, certain later ones kind of brought a little more character into him. Like when you get to What's New, he's a bit more of a gormless himbo, which is fun.
Yeah, and at some point they decided he's in love with the Mystery Machine.
Yeah.
It's a weird turn. I would love to figure out exactly when that happens, but...
Yeah, and in the live action movies, the 2 James Gunn ones, not the Mystery Begins, Curse the Lake monster ones, but we...
Where he's not even blonde.
That's an issue. The 2 live action movies that we love and we've talked about on this podcast before. We say the James Gunn ones, although he didn't direct them, he should have, but that's another issue. But yeah, in that, obviously they kind of lean more into his egotism a little bit and actually make it more of a character flaw that he has to overcome, which is kind of nice. But yeah, by far, Mystery Incorporated, you can say this of all the characters, it's the most fleshed out they've felt, but Fred in particular, it's just like, no, you gave him growth, you gave him pathos, you gave him like really tough, kind of life-shattering things that he had to work through.
Yeah, you gave him, I mean, I don't know if I would say it's necessarily coding, but you could have a reading that he's maybe neurodivergent in some way. Like he's really, he's really not very good at connecting emotions or like reading people's, body language or what they're feeling, you know. like when Shaggy dumps Velma and she's upset, Daphne's kind of cradling her, and Fred's just, great, we can all go back to being friends again.
It's just like, read the room, Fred.
Yeah, but there is a learning process, and in a way he has to learn to be a better boyfriend to Daphne to win her back in the end.
Yeah. Speaking of coding, Velma's totally gay in this version, and even one of the producers confirmed that in an Instagram post for Pride Month, which is lovely. Because as I recall, when we were first watching it, we were a little bit like, about the Shaggy and Velma stuff in the early episodes, because it was just like, this kind of feels toxic as hell, and Velma's deeply unlikable in how she's handling a lot of this. But as the show progresses, and if you read between the lines, it's like that's very much intentional. She sort of couldn't quite get the relationship with Shaggy to work, but hadn't figured out certain things about herself yet. So she wasn't. So the why of why that relationship wasn't working just wasn't really there for her. And then of course, when she connects with Marcy, who had never had a friend before. And Marcy's last line of the series, post timeline reset and everything, is "That's my girl." It's like they knew what they were doing.
Wink. I think a shout out just needs to go to the voice cast as well, because I think me and Ross are in agreement. It's our favorite collective cast for the characters.
Probably.
Yep. First use of Matthew Lillard voicing Shaggy, which is just perfect. And I love the kind of manic energy, the manic teen energy he just brings to the character with Ross. Frank Welker, obviously, he's a legend. He's always been great, but he's allowed to have more dramatic moments with Fred and with Scooby, and I think this was probably the property where he perfected the Scooby voice.
I would say so.
And, Mindy Cohn is my favorite Velma, to be honest.
Yeah, I won't disagree.
Just love the snarky Dariness, and Grey DeLisle Griffin, she's been doing Daphne for a long time now, but again, I think this was also probably the most dramatic weight she's been able to bring to the character so far.
My favorite Daphne, it's probably Grey. I do have a soft spot for the late Mary Kay Bergman from Zombie Island as well. But Grey has the advantage of having been Daphne in more things, and by that point, by the time Mystery Incorporated rolled around, she had enough of a handle on the more kind of, for lack of a better term, 2D version of the character, so that she had the voice and mannerisms down, so it was just that plus a bit of extra kind of weight and pathos.
Well, I think that's it, because they actually are getting to act. You're getting to be like, actually, there are going to be a couple scenes here where you got to put a little more in, and so naturally they all.
And it was the first time when the actors were actually recording their lines together. They weren't separated by different booths.
It shows, to be honest, because the way they bounce off each other feels very organic.
As a side note, I would pay for any footage of when Scooby and Sheriff Bronson Stone are just growling at each other. I just want to see Frank Walker and Patrick Warburton growling.
Because some voice actors do just kind of. I hear stories about like when Mark Hamill was doing the Joker in BTAS and presumably a lot of subsequent DCAU properties, where he was actually one of the few actors who would actually stand up in the recording booth. Like most of the rest of them would just be seated with the microphone with their lines and just sort of do that. But Hamill would stand up. He'd get animated and into the part and whatever. and it's like, and supposedly the animators and showrunners actually based a lot of the subsequent drawings and animation of the Joker's movement on Hamill's mannerisms when he was recording. It wouldn't surprise me if the animators on Mystery Incorporated did similar things with the way the characters interact and bounce off each other on screen, as referenced from the voice actors.
So good. Also,
it's a cracking show. Absolutely cracking.
It also has like as you've said, by digital animation standards, it's like some of the best looking you'll see.
100%. I mean, I think we've said this before. We miss hand drawn animation. We miss the watercolor backgrounds of Zombie Island and so on. But you know what? Like, as digital animation goes, it's like you got deep lines, you got heavy shadows, you got
a lot of
pops
attention
of color.
to detail for where the lighting is.
Yeah. It all looks about as good as digital animation has ever looked from my opinion.
Yeah.
It also toes that nice line of having its own style without being irritating. Like, look at these fun little character designs back here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like they are stylized. They have a way of drawing them, and it's quite pleasing. It's very, very, very nice.
Again, like they've got slightly different things than how we traditionally see the characters. Like, Fred's got kind of a Desperate Dan chin. Shaggy's got maybe more of a pronounced quiff in his hairdo. But
Velma's sort of got a hair clip.
But like, they're all very recognizable.
Yeah, that's it.
As opposed to something like say K-Ghoul Scooby Doo, which
Yeah.
I actually, you know what, as a show, it's not bad. Like people love to shit on it. I actually think it's pretty fun for what it is, but I will attest the character designs, you do have to get past that before you enjoy it.
Yeah.
It just kind of looks like Diet Family Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think we've pretty much said our piece at this point. Like, do we want to? I don't know. Do we want to wrap up, kind of succinctly summarize why Scooby-Doo and Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated works so well and is kind of the definitive thing for serializing the property?
I would say it respects the original formula, incorporates new elements into that formula to make it more of a fleshed out full piece, but brings in a lot of fun influences to make it more three-dimensional.
Yeah, Felix?
I mean, it's hard to top that. That is perfect. I think what makes it work on a very, very, very similar note is just that they paused, they went, what is Scooby-Doo at its core? And then found a way to blend that with serializing. It doesn't feel like they tried to smash two things together and then just sort of went, that'll do. It is both serialized and Scooby-Doo in a beautiful blend.
Yeah, you both summed it up pretty succinctly. I'll see if I can add anything to the table. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is kind of, in a way, it's sort of a love letter to the IP and to the franchise, but also just stands on its own as, for me, one of the definitive Scooby-Doo stories. And
just one of the best animated series.
That too. Again, as Western animation goes, pretty top tier for me, honestly, up there with Futurama and the DCAU. But yeah, it's, that they approached it from a place of the utmost sincerity as kind of, a love letter to the franchise, something that honored the roots, but knew how to evolve it into the modern day, while bringing their influences. It definitely had a few of those, but it incorporated them in an organic way, and just, made something that just felt kind of familiar enough, but like completely fresh and completely new, and kind of, just create this whole other epic story, really.
Agreed. Again, I say it's so good.
Why do we not have a definitive home media release of this show yet?
Come on, Warner Brothers.
We need to come on. Like, I'm sick of seeing like #restore the Snyderverse or whatever else.
Restore the incorporated verse.
So, good enough. Or give Mystery Inc. a Blu-ray. I'd love to just have that sitting next to our other box sets, just a nice little contained Blu-ray set of Mystery Incorporated. That'd be beautiful. It would look great on Blu-ray too. Again, the best digital animation has ever looked.
Okay, well, I think we've given a very in-depth as usual, rundown of what serialization in Scooby-Doo looks like.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us, Felix. It's been a pleasure talking Scooby with you, as always. I mean, we've done it informally many a time in the past, so it's nice to actually have you on the podcast.
Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure, team.
Again, can't tell how much sincerity was in there, but I'll take
It's all there. Listeners, you could follow me online at my socials. I don't know what they are. Find me.
Do you have any platforms you want to plug while you're here? Any fun projects you're working on? Anything like that?
No.
No. Okay. Fair enough.
No, none. In like 3 years' time, I'll be like a licensed counselor. So if you need help in 3 years' time, come to me.
Very good.
But not now. You got to listen to this in 3 years' time. Then we'll talk.
Just listen to this episode. That'll be therapy enough. Well, listen to this episode and then watch Mystery Incorporated.
All therapy you need.
There you go.
That's my plug. Mystery Incorporated.
Good life-affirming Scooby content. Oh God, can we say content? Everything's content now.
I made you some content.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, in that case, I think that about does it for now.
Yeah. So...
Thanks again for tuning in, guys. As said, we're on Twitter now. You can find us at K-Ghoul Scooby Pod.
But in the meantime, everyone stay spooky.
Yep, and we'll see you with whatever we decide to talk about next. All right.
Bye.
Bye.